The sirens hit my driveway at 6 in the morning, and before I could find my slippers, a tow truck had its steel hooks under the front axle of the one thing I had promised my wife I would never sell. Across the street, HOA President Marjorie Voss stood on her perfect lawn in a silk robe, smiling like she had just won an election nobody else knew was happening. Then she pointed at my truck and shouted, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear, "Get that rust bucket out of here before it drags all our property values down." My name is Cole Mercer, and the truck was a 1969 Chevrolet C10, midnight blue, white roof, factory bench seat, and an engine that sounded like distant thunder when it turned over. I had spent 14 years rebuilding it, not to impress anybody, but because my late wife, Hannah, had found it behind a barn outside Lubbock and told me it looked stubborn enough to belong to me. She had been right about the truck and, as it turned out, about the neighborhood too. After she passed, I sold our place in Fort Worth and moved to Hawthorne Ridge, a polished community outside San Antonio where every mailbox matched. Every lawn looked trimmed with surgical instruments, and people waved with the caution of folks who assumed somebody was keeping score. I was 61, newly retired after 27 years investigating financial crimes for the federal government, and all I wanted was a quiet garage, decent coffee, and enough room to finish the truck the way Hannah and I had planned. For the first 5 days, that was exactly what I got. On the 6th morning, Marjorie rang my bell at 7 sharp, dressed in tennis whites and holding a leather folder like a judge carrying a sentence. She did not say welcome or ask how I was settling in. She looked past me toward the driveway and said, "We need to discuss the commercial vehicle." I turned around, thinking a delivery van had pulled in behind me. When I realized she meant the C10, I laughed, and that was my first mistake. Marjorie did not strike me as a woman who heard much laughter that was not approved in advance. I told her the truck was registered as an antique, insured, fully operational, and parked on my own concrete. She gave me a thin smile and said Hawthorne Ridge was competing for a regional beautification award, which could raise home values by 15%, and visual disruptions would not be tolerated. Visual disruption, I said, looking at the truck. "Ma'am, that paint job cost more than my first house." Her smile disappeared. "Rules are rules, Mr. Mercer. People move here for standards." Then she walked away before I could ask which rule I had broken. 3 days later, I found a violation notice under the windshield wiper, printed on thick cream paper with a gold seal. Non-conforming vehicle storage, improper driveway use, negative visual impact. It was read to sound official without saying anything measurable. A trick I had seen white-collar crooks use when they wanted fear to do the work. Facts could not. I read the HOA handbook twice that night. There was nothing banning classic trucks, nothing limiting vehicle color, nothing defining negative visual impact, and nothing granting Marjorie the authority to invent rules between breakfast and lunch. I called her anyway. She answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear keys clicking in the background. I asked her to identify the section I had violated. She said, "Community standards are interpreted by the board." I asked whether the board had voted. She paused, then said, "We will." That answer told me more than she intended. The meeting happened the following Thursday in the clubhouse. A room decorated with beige curtains, artificial ferns, and enough lemon air freshener to strip paint. 20 residents sat in folding chairs while Marjorie presided beside 2 board members who looked chosen for their ability to nod. I brought my registration, insurance, property survey, restoration photos, and a copy of the HOA rules marked with yellow tabs. Marjorie barely looked at them. She projected a photo of my truck onto the wall and said its profile was inconsistent with the community image. A retired teacher named Paula Ames added that the color felt aggressive. I looked at the screen, then at her. "It is navy blue," I said. "The ocean is more aggressive than that." A few people laughed, but stopped when Marjorie stared at them. The board voted 3-1 to fine me $200 a day until the truck was removed from view. The one dissenting vote came from the treasurer, Leonard Pike, a quiet former accountant who kept his eyes on the table. As people filed out, an elderly neighbor named Teresa Alvarez touched my sleeve and whispered, "Do not pay her anything yet. She has done this before." Teresa smelled faintly of cinnamon and garden soil, and there was real fear in her voice. She told me Marjorie had fined a widower for displaying a Marine Corps flag, forced a young mother to remove a basketball hoop, and threatened a family over the sound of their garage door. Every target had asked questions about money, contracts, or board authority. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the violation notice beside Hannah's old coffee mug, listening to the soft tick of the cooling engine in the garage. I had spent years watching powerful people hide theft behind procedure, titles, and expensive stationery. Marjorie thought she had found another lonely retiree she could pressure into obedience. What she'd actually done was hand a financial investigator a reason to start digging. The next morning, I sent the HOA a formal request for 3 years of financial records, vendor contracts, meeting minutes, insurance documents, and every invoice connected to landscaping, security, legal services, and property management. I kept the language polite, which is something people often mistake for weakness until they realize politeness gives them nothing useful to twist later. Marjorie responded within 2 hours, not with the records, but with a message asking why I felt entitled to burden unpaid community volunteers with unreasonable demands. I wrote back that homeowners funded the association and had a right to know where their money went. Her second response was shorter. Your request is under review. That same afternoon, she parked her white SUV across from my house and sat there for 20 minutes with the engine running, pretending to examine a clipboard while staring directly at my garage. I stood at the window holding Hannah's coffee mug and watched her watch me, and I felt something I had not expected in retirement. That old familiar pressure behind my ribs, the one that used to show up when a suspect realized I was getting close. 3 days later, Marjorie appeared in my driveway wearing a navy polo embroidered with the words Hawthorne Ridge Compliance. She carried a measuring wheel, a camera, and the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no without trying to charge a fee for it. She measured the distance between my truck and the sidewalk, then crouched behind the bumper and took several photographs. I stepped outside and asked if she needed help finding whatever crime scene she had invented. She did not smile. I am documenting pedestrian obstruction. There was 8 feet of clear pavement behind the truck. I pointed that out, and she placed a small orange cone near the bumper before taking another picture. I looked at the cone, then at her. Did that cone arrive with its own witness statement, or are you planning to write one for it later? Her cheeks tightened. People like you always think rules do not apply to them. People like me, I said quietly. She looked away too fast, and that told me the sentence had gone somewhere she had not intended. I let her leave without mentioning the new security cameras mounted under my roofline. Cameras clear enough to capture the label on the measuring wheel and the exact moment she positioned the cone. By Friday, the records finally arrived in 4 battered cardboard boxes dropped outside my garage. They smelled like dust, mildew, and the kind of panic that comes from realizing someone might actually read the paperwork. Marjorie had buried invoices among newsletters, pool schedules, expired insurance brochures, and duplicate meeting packets. But disorder is not protection when the person looking at it spent half his career reconstructing fraud from shredded bank statements. I created a spreadsheet, sorted every payment by vendor, date, amount, and approving board member, then worked until 2 in the morning with Hannah's old jazz records playing softly in the kitchen. The first irregularity was almost funny. Hawthorne Ridge had paid $6,000 for winter irrigation repairs in a section of the neighborhood that had no irrigation system. The second was harder to laugh at. $2,400 a month for pest control during periods when no technician had entered the property. Then came the landscaping contract, $165,000 annually, awarded without competitive bids to Voss Outdoor Solutions, a company owned by Marjorie's husband, Calvin. The contract had been renewed 4 times, each time with Marjorie voting in favor and Leonard signing as treasurer. There were invoices for tree removal after storms that had never damaged a tree, charges for replacing benches that still had original manufacturer tags, and security patrols conducted by a company registered to a mailbox in Phoenix. The more I followed the money, the more Hawthorne Ridge stopped looking like a community association and started looking like a private cash machine with flower beds. Teresa came by Saturday afternoon carrying a foil-covered tray of enchiladas and the expression of someone about to confess to a bank robbery. She told me a few neighbors wanted to meet, but they were afraid Marjorie would find out. We gathered that night in Teresa's living room, 9 adults sitting too close together beneath family photographs and a ceiling fan that clicked on every rotation. There was Malcolm Reed, a retired Marine cited because his American flag was supposedly too visible from the street. Nina Shaw, a pediatric nurse fined for leaving her daughter's bicycle near the garage for 40 minutes. Owen Briggs, A widower threatened with legal action because his porch light was the wrong shade of white. Each story sounded ridiculous by itself, but the pattern was not ridiculous at all. Every one of them had questioned a special assessment, challenged a vendor charge, or asked why dues kept rising while repairs were delayed. Marjorie was not targeting ugly houses. She was targeting curiosity. I explained what I had found without promising anything dramatic. I told them to save letters, photograph conditions before correcting them, record dates, and avoid angry confrontations. Criminal cases are built with patience, not volume. Malcolm leaned back and said, "So we are supposed to let her keep kicking us while we take pictures?" "For a little while," I said. He did not like that answer, but he understood it. The next week, Marjorie escalated. A process server arrived before sunrise with a letter from attorney Preston Voss, Calvin's younger brother, demanding immediate payment of accumulated fines and threatening a lien against my home. The letter claimed I owed $4,800, including legal fees, for a hearing that had never occurred. I called an old colleague named Dana Brooks, who had spent years investigating professional misconduct. 20 minutes later, she sent me Preston's disciplinary history. He had been suspended in Nevada for representing relatives in property disputes without disclosing conflicts, and reprimanded in Arizona for submitting altered billing records. Marjorie had not hired a lawyer to solve the issue. She had brought another family member into the machine. I requested an independent hearing, challenged every fine, and demanded proof that the board had followed its own notice and appeal procedures. The response was silence, followed by 2 new violations, one for excessive engine noise and another for performing commercial mechanical work in a residential garage. The engine noise complaint listed Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning, when I had been 70 miles away at a doctor's appointment. My garage camera showed the truck untouched all day. The mechanical work complaint included a photograph of my hood open, taken while I was checking the oil. Apparently, maintaining a classic truck had become an underground industrial operation. Lannard approached me in the grocery store 2 evenings later. He looked thinner than he had at the meeting, his cart filled with items he did not seem aware he was buying. He kept his voice low. "You need to stop asking for records." I asked if that was advice from the treasurer or a warning from a frightened man. His eyes moved toward the end of the aisle. "She keeps files on people," he whispered. "Medical issues, divorces, children's arrests, financial problems, anything she can use." I asked what she had on it. He gripped the cart so tightly his knuckles turned white, then walked away without answering. I did not follow. Fear has its own timetable, and forcing it usually makes people retreat deeper. That night, I searched public property records linked to Marjorie and Calvin. The real estate company had purchased distressed homes in 3 other developments, always after months of aggressive HOA fines, legal threats, and collapsing sale prices. In one Arizona neighborhood, a homeowner had lost nearly a third of his property value before selling to a company controlled by Marjorie's cousin. In Nevada, a widow facing invented maintenance penalties had accepted a cash offer from Calvin just days before foreclosure proceedings. Hawthorne Ridge was not their first experiment. It was the latest market. The next morning, I found an envelope taped inside my screen door. No stamp, no name, just copies of bank statements, vendor ledgers, and an email printed in black and white. The email was from Marjorie to Leonard. "The new owner with the blue truck is a problem. He understands financial documents and is encouraging residents to question authority. Increase pressure until he sells or leaves." I read that sentence twice, then heard a soft knock behind me. Leonard stood on the porch looking like he had not slept in a week. "She found my son's sealed arrest record," he said, his voice barely holding together. "He was 17, nobody was hurt, and the court sealed it, but she got a copy somehow. She said she would send it to his employer and his fiancee's family if I refused to sign the checks." She looked past me toward the truck, then back at the papers in my hand. "I have 3 years of everything, Cole. Fake vendors, forged approvals, payments to her relatives, all of it." I asked why he had chosen that morning to come forward. Leonard swallowed hard. "Because she hired a towing company last night, and I heard her tell them to be here Saturday at 6. I glanced at the calendar on the wall. Saturday was tomorrow. Before sunrise, I moved the evidence into a fireproof case, checked every camera, backed the recordings up to 2 separate locations, and placed my old credential wallet beside the coffee maker. Then I sat alone in the garage, one hand resting on the smooth blue fender Hannah had helped me sand years before, listening to the ticking metal as the engine cooled. I knew Marjorie believed the Tao would humiliate me into surrender. What she did not know was that by trying to take my truck, she was about to put her entire operation in front of uniformed witnesses. At 5:58 Saturday morning, the first red and blue lights washed across my bedroom wall, followed by the low mechanical growl of a diesel tow truck backing into my driveway. By the time I stepped outside, barefoot and carrying my credential wallet, the driver had already hooked a steel cable beneath the front of the C10, and two patrol officers stood beside him studying a complaint form. Marjorie was across the street in a silver robe, one hand wrapped around a coffee cup, the other pointing toward my truck as if she had personally captured an enemy tank. That eyesore's finally leaving, she announced to the neighbors gathering behind windows and half-open doors. Tow it now. The older officer raised his palm when I approached. Sir, stay back while the operator secures the vehicle. We have a report that it has been abandoned and presents a public safety hazard. I looked at the truck, then at the clean driveway beneath it. Abandoned, I said. I drove it yesterday. Marjorie stepped off her lawn. He refuses to comply with lawful HOA orders. We have photographs, witness statements, and accumulated penalties. The younger officer glanced at her, already looking less certain. I opened my wallet and held it where they could both see the retired federal credentials and gold shield I had carried through 27 years of fraud investigations. The effect was immediate. The older officer straightened. The younger one lowered his clipboard, and the tow driver stopped the winch before my front tires left the concrete. I told them I was retired, that I was not claiming authority over a local matter, and that I had evidence they had been given false information. Then I opened the fireproof case on the hood of their patrol car. Inside were the antique registration, current insurance, property survey, security footage, fabricated violation photographs, emails ordering pressure against me, and the financial records Leonard had delivered. The older officer watched the video of Marjorie placing the orange cone behind my truck, then looked across the street at her. Ma'am, did you create this obstruction yourself? Marjorie lifted her chin. I was demonstrating a potential hazard. You reported it as an existing hazard. He said, that is different. She stepped closer, a robe fluttering in the morning breeze. This is my community. I am the elected president, and these men are acting under HOA authority. The tow driver quietly began loosening the cable. I almost admired his survival instincts. Then Leonard came down the sidewalk, carrying another manila envelope, his face pale, but his back straighter than I had ever seen it. Officers, he said, I am the association treasurer, and this is not about a truck. She has been using HOA enforcement to intimidate residents while diverting association money into companies owned by her family. Marjorie turned on him so quickly, coffee spilled over her hand. Leonard, you signed every check. You are just as responsible. He flinched, but did not retreat. I signed because you threatened my son with a sealed juvenile record you had no legal right to possess. The street went quiet. Teresa stepped out of her house, still wearing slippers. Malcolm followed with his marine cap in his hand. And one by one the neighbors began speaking. Fake storm cleanup, landscaping work that had never happened, legal fees for hearings nobody received, charges for repairs to property that did not exist. The older officer called for a detective, and by 7:15 the tow truck was gone. The C10 was back on all four tires, and Marjorie stood alone on her lawn while residents she had kept separated for years formed a circle around the patrol cars. The investigation moved faster after that. Leonard agreed to cooperate, and Dana connected us with investigators who could examine the interstate companies without relying on neighborhood rumors. Bank subpoenas showed more than $320,000 in HOA funds had moved through shell vendors tied to Marjorie, Calvin, and Preston. Property records revealed they had used some of that money as down payments on distressed homes in other communities, homes whose owners had first been buried under aggressive fines and legal threats. Security footage caught Calvin deflating two of my tires 3 nights later while Marjorie stood near the curb telling him to make it look accidental. Their voices were clear enough to hear her say, "We need him gone before Leonard talks to anyone important." She still did not understand Leonard had already talked. A week later, federal agents and state investigators arrived at Hawthorne Ridge just after dawn. Black vehicles rolled past matching mailboxes while residents watched from porches with coffee cups held at chest level. Search warrants were served at Marjorie's house, the HOA office, and Voss Outdoor Solutions. Agents found shredded contracts in her home office, cash withdrawal receipts in a kitchen drawer, and a laptop containing emails about targeting difficult homeowners until they sold. The line that stayed with me was simple: fear works faster than foreclosure. Marjorie had written it herself. The special HOA meeting was moved from the clubhouse to a high school auditorium because nearly every homeowner wanted to attend. Marjorie arrived against her lawyer's advice, wearing a dark suit and the expression of someone who still believed confidence could substitute for innocence. I stood at the podium and displayed the payments, contracts, property purchases, and emails on a screen large enough that nobody could pretend not to understand. Leonard played the recording of her threatening his son's future, and the room went so still I could hear the air conditioner laboring above us. Marjorie rose and called the entire presentation a conspiracy, led by a bitter retiree with a personal grudge. Then the side doors opened. Investigators walked down the aisle and placed her under arrest for fraud, theft, conspiracy, obstruction, witness intimidation, and falsify reports. The applause started in the back, then moved forward like thunder. I did not clap. I watched her look around the auditorium, not at the officers or the cameras, but at the residents she had treated as weak pieces on a board. For the first time, she seemed to understand they were people. 9 months later, Marjorie accepted a plea agreement that sent her to federal prison. Calvin received a shorter sentence for conspiracy and evidence tampering, and Preston lost his license before facing charges of his own. Seized properties and frozen accounts funded restitution, though no check could return the years Leonard spent afraid for his son, or erase the humiliation Teresa and Malcolm had carried. Hawthorne Ridge elected a new board, published every contract online, required competitive bids, and prohibited relatives of board members from receiving association work. Dues dropped, the landscaping somehow remained perfectly adequate, and the neighborhood survived the devastating sight of my blue truck sitting openly in the driveway. Some mornings, I still take Hannah's mug into the garage and run my hand along the fender we sanded together. I used to think winning meant seeing handcuffs close or watching stolen money returned. Now I think it means something quieter. Neighbors standing in one another's driveways, people asking questions without whispering, and frightened men like Leonard finally deciding fear has cost enough. Marjorie claimed she was protecting property values, and maybe that is what she told herself after repeating the lie long enough. But I believe she wanted power because power made her feel safe, and once she had it, stealing became easy. So tell me what you think. Was I right to let the case build while my neighbors kept suffering? Or should I have confronted her sooner and risked losing the evidence that finally brought her down? Leave your judgment in the comments. Share the most outrageous thing an HOA has ever done in your community. And subscribe if you believe rules should protect ordinary people instead of becoming weapons for whoever holds the clipboard.